Mrs. Jenkins had chosen this place a long time ago. At first, however, she was shy, even turned away when someone she knew passed by, but then she got used to it. And she really knew many people because all her life Mrs. Jenkins had worked as a teacher in the local school. But life happened that in her old age she had to sell produce from her own garden, and all because she desperately wanted to help her daughter Scarlett and granddaughter Amelia, but her pension was low. Her son-in-law found another wife, and after the divorce, Scarlett and her child lived alone in a rented apartment, worked all day long, but there wasn't enough money. Scarlett and Amelia usually visited her on weekends, and Mrs. Jenkins tried to give her daughter at least some money every time. Scarlett resisted every time and told her mother off. "Mum, what are you doing? I have a job, and you should have more rest, less gardening, and not sell all day long." "Well, daughter, I am still strong, and while I have strength, I want to help you. I can see how hard you work, and the garden is my pleasure, so nothing will happen to me. Take the money. Don't hurt me. Buy Amelia new boots. How is it possible to go to school in such worn boots?" Scarlett, hardly holding back her tears, gratefully embraced her mother, and so they lived, helping each other as best they could, dreaming that someday they would be much better. The square where Mrs. Jenkins, like other village women, sold fruits and vegetables, were not chosen by chance. Firstly, buses to the city departed from here. In addition, the square was located near a busy highway, and many cars and intercity buses stopped there so that passengers could stretch their legs after a long sitting. And of course there was great interest in the village's organic products, so people bought up everything, even without bargaining, since there was no time for that. Mrs. Jenkins chose a faraway corner of the square. At first other women thought that Mrs. Jenkins would not have any trade, but Mrs. Jenkins only smiled silently. And then the women began to notice that the former teacher's products were more readily bought than theirs. They could not figure out what it was all about, and asked Mrs. Jenkins's neighbour, Mrs. Brown, to find out. Mrs. Jenkins and Mrs. Brown had known each other for many years because their houses were next to each other. When they were young, even though they often competed, they treated each other charitably, but over the years there has been nothing left of their good neighbourly relationship. However, they never openly clashed and talked to each other rather amicably. Mrs. Jenkins knew that if something happened to her neighbour, she would be the first to rush to her aid, and she believed that Mrs. Brown would do the same. So, without suspecting anything wrong, Mrs. Jenkins shared with Mrs. Brown the secret of her success. You see, everyone wants a natural and organic product, but near the road, vegetables can get saturated with dust and exhaust fumes. People can see me from the bus, and when they come out on the square, they immediately understand that my produce is cleaner, so they buy it more readily. Since then, Mrs. Jenkins had no peace. Other women did not touch her place, but Mrs. Brown several times occupied it, and each time the answer was the same. "I thought you weren't coming today, so I decided to take your place in the shade." "Well, if you'd like, you can take mine, because I have already arranged everything here." Understanding that it was useless to argue, Mrs. Jenkins usually took Mrs. Brown's place, and on the next days she tried to get out early to get ahead of her cunning neighbour. And so this morning, Mrs. Jenkins got up early, came out of the house with the first rays of the sun, and wheeled her cart to the square. After walking a few metres, she heard the slamming of Mrs. Brown's gate and increased her step, realising that her rival had also decided to take a good place early. As hard as her neighbour tried, Mrs. Jenkins managed to get to the best spot first. "What a speed you have! As if you have not worked all your life with papers," said Mrs. Brown, panting with annoyance. "Good morning to you too, neighbour," replied Mrs. Jenkins with a grin. They began to arrange their groceries in silence, But then they got bored and began a leisurely conversation about the vegetable garden, about children and grandchildren. "So Scarlett's husband hasn't come back yet?" asked Mrs. Brown. "No, and thank God. Who needs this traitor?" "That's right. Scarlett is a clever girl. She'll find happiness." "Maybe so, but she hasn't had any luck yet," sighed Mrs. Jenkins. The time flew by quickly, and the first buses began to arrive. In the middle of the day, a car stopped at the square, and a young man in an old jacket and black pants got out and thanked the driver. Mrs. Brown immediately guessed that the stranger had probably just got out of prison. The man meanwhile stopped, looked for something in his pockets, and approached Mrs. Jenkins. "Excuse me, I only have $1. Can I have a couple of apples?" he asked. "Take it for free. You're not from around here. Where are you from?" asked Mrs. Jenkins. The man enjoyed crunching his apple and told her that he had recently been released from prison and was on his way home. When he saw the woman's wary gaze, he hastened to reassure her, saying that he had neither killed nor robbed anyone, and that it was a long story. He was without money because freedom had turned his head. When he got out, he had money, but fate brought him together with 2 women. They talked to him and left him without money. It was good that kind people helped, and somehow he managed to hitchhike here, but he would probably have to walk the remaining 40 kilometers. "Do you have family? Why don't you call them?" asked Mrs. Jenkins. "Yes," the man answered glumly, and his eyes sparkled menacingly. "But I want to surprise them." At that moment, a bus was going to the very town the stranger was from, turned into the square, and the man rushed to the driver. After talking to him for a few minutes, he came back frustrated. "He won't take me without money. It's against the rules, and he's afraid of losing his job," said the man sadly. "And the ticket costs $50. Mrs. Jenkins looked sympathetically at the man, reached into her pocket, and under the astonished looks of the other women, handed him the money. The man was stunned and, heartily thanking Mrs. Jenkins for her help, ran to the bus. "Thank you! I'll definitely pay you back as soon as I get home," he shouted, turning around halfway. "My name is Hugo. And you?" "Mrs. Jenkins. Get on the bus or you'll be late." "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. We'll definitely meet up. I promise." The bus pulled out of the square, and the women immediately attacked Mrs. Jenkins with accusations. "What a fool you are! He won't give it back." "I don't expect it," said Mrs. Jenkins, shrugging her shoulders. "We're human beings, not animals, and we're supposed to help each other." "He isn't a good man, he's a convict," they continued, but Mrs. Jenkins no longer listened to them and began preparing to go home. By the weekend, Mrs. Jenkins was sick and lay down with a high fever. Scarlett fussed over her mother, stoked the fireplace, gave her hot tea and some medicine. "Mother, how on earth did you get so sick?" said Scarlett, sitting down on the edge of the bed, and her voice trembled. "Oh, I came to the square and it started raining. I got soaked on the way home. I must have caught a cold." "It's all because of us again," said her daughter sadly, and tears came to her eyes. Realizing that Scarlett was about to cry, Mrs. Jenkins turned to her granddaughter and asked her to read a story. The girl happily ran to get the book, and Scarlett went into the kitchen. Amelia was reading a third story. The wood was crackling in the fireplace, and it seemed to Mrs. Jenkins that the disease gradually receded. Scarlett had just begun to serve dinner when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Scarlett opened the door and confusedly looked at the stranger, who asked for Mrs. Jenkins. Scarlett led the guest into her mother's room, warning him that she was ill. Mrs. Jenkins looked at the man and was surprised to recognize in this handsome young man, in an expensive suit, her recent acquaintance Hugo. The man apologized for not coming sooner, but he had some business to take care of. "Oh, you didn't have to bother yourself," Mrs. Jenkins waved her hand. "No, I must have. You've really helped me out a lot." Scarlett, blushing with embarrassment, invited Hugo to have dinner with them. Mrs. Jenkins looked at her daughter with surprise, and then shifted her gaze to Hugo, who was looking at Scarlett with interest. When they sat down at the table, Hugo told them his story. It turns out that he and his half-brother inherited their father's company. Hugo was engaged in financial matters and his brother in production. And then his brother set him up by falsifying documents as if Hugo was a tax evader. As it turned out after the trial, his wife was involved in this dirty story and soon divorced him to marry his brother. Hugo was given 6 months and a hefty fine. Of course, he was sad for the wasted days of his life, but he was not discouraged. Hugo came a few more times on weekends, and then one day Mrs. Jenkins heard from her granddaughter that he was also inviting them in the city. Mrs. Jenkins did not know what to think, but all her worries came to an end when one day Hugo's car stopped outside the house and he got out of it with a huge bouquet of flowers. Scarlett got nervous and ran to the mirror, and Amelia philosophically remarked, "The groom has arrived. Why is she nervous? After all, her wedding is soon." Mrs. Jenkins breathed a sigh of relief and thought with a smile that finally good times were coming to their lives. And for some reason, she was sure that her daughter would never be abandoned by Hugo.